The old pickup truck sputtered to a stop at the edge of the dusty ranch road, black smoke curling from under its dented hood. Sarah Martinez sat behind the wheel, her hands trembling as she stared through the cracked windshield at the vast Texas landscape stretching endlessly before her. The engine made one final wheeze before falling silent, leaving only the sound of hot metal ticking in the oppressive afternoon heat. At 23 years old, Sarah had never felt more alone in her life. The bruise around her left eye had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memories of how she got it remained sharp and painful. 3 days ago, she had finally gathered enough courage to leave her abusive boyfriend Marcus in Dallas, taking nothing but the clothes on her back, $200 in cash, and this barely running truck she had bought from a stranger in a parking lot. She had no plan, no destination, no family to turn to. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 18, leaving her with no safety net except for the toxic relationship she had just escaped. The GPS on her phone had died somewhere outside of Abilene, and she had been driving aimlessly through small Texas towns, sleeping in the truck and eating gas station sandwiches. Now, stranded on this empty road with the sun beating down mercilessly, Sarah felt the familiar weight of despair settling over her shoulders. She tried turning the key again, but the engine only clicked mockingly. Tears of frustration and fear began to blur her vision as she realized her situation was becoming desperate. The landscape around her seemed to mock her predicament. Rolling hills covered in scrub brush and mesquite trees stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional fence post or cattle gate. In the distance, she could make out a cluster of buildings that might have been a ranch, but it seemed impossibly far away in the shimmering heat. Sarah had always been a city girl, born and raised in the concrete jungle of Dallas. The wide-open spaces felt alien and threatening rather than peaceful. Every sound made her jump, from the creaking of metal expanding in the heat to the distant lowing of cattle she couldn't see. As she sat there contemplating her options, which seemed depressingly few, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Sarah's heart began to race as she watched a horse and rider approaching at a steady pace. Her first instinct was to lock the doors and duck down, but she realized how foolish that would look. Instead, she gripped the steering wheel tighter and tried to appear composed despite her racing pulse. The rider drew closer, and Sarah could make out a tall man wearing a worn cowboy hat and faded jeans. His horse, a beautiful chestnut mare, moved with the easy grace of an animal well-trained and well-loved. As they approached her broken-down truck, the cowboy raised his hand in a friendly wave and guided his horse to a stop a respectful distance from her window. He removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners. His hair was dark with threads of gray at the temples, and his face spoke of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. Despite her fear of strangers, something about his gentle demeanor made Sarah feel slightly less panicked. "Morning, miss," he said in a soft drawl that immediately put her at ease. His voice carried the warmth of someone genuinely concerned for a fellow human being. "Looks like you might be having some trouble with your vehicle there." Sarah rolled down her window cautiously, grateful for any human contact even as her nerves remained on edge. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just died on me. I'm not really sure what's wrong with it." The cowboy dismounted with the fluid motion of someone who had been riding horses his entire life. He approached the truck slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Name's Jake Morrison," he said with a gentle smile. "I own the ranch about 2 miles up this road. Would it be all right if I took a look under the hood? I've fixed my share of broken-down vehicles over the years." Sarah hesitated. Her recent experiences had taught her to be wary of men offering help, but something about Jake's manner suggested genuine kindness rather than hidden motives. His eyes held none of the calculating coldness she had learned to recognize and fear. After a moment, She nodded and popped the hood release. Jake walked around to the front of the truck and lifted the hood, whistling low under his breath as he examined the engine. "Well, there's your problem right there," he said after a few minutes. "Your radiator's got more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese, and looks like your water pump's given up the ghost, too. This old girl's not going anywhere under her own power." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Without the truck, she was truly stranded. She felt tears welling up again and fought to keep them from falling, not wanting to appear weak in front of this stranger. Jake seemed to sense her distress because his voice became even gentler. "Hey now, don't look so worried. These things happen out here more often than you'd think. Tell you what, why don't you come up to the ranch with me? My wife Martha makes the best iced tea in 3 counties, and we can figure out what to do about your truck once you've had a chance to cool off and get something cold to drink." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned the hard way that accepting help from men often came with strings attached. But as she looked around at the empty landscape and felt the heat radiating from the pavement, she realized she didn't have many options. She was already dehydrated, and the temperature was climbing toward what felt like triple digits. "I don't want to impose," she said uncertainly. "I can wait here for someone else to come along." Jake's expression grew concerned. "Miss, with respect, this road doesn't see much traffic, especially during the heat of the day, and sitting in that truck without air conditioning in this weather could be dangerous. I promise you'll be safe at the ranch. My wife will be there along with our ranch hands. You're welcome to use our phone to call whoever you need to call." The mention of his wife made Sarah feel slightly more comfortable about accepting his offer. She didn't have anyone to call, but she didn't need to tell him that right away. After another moment of hesitation, she nodded and gathered her small backpack from the passenger seat. Jake helped her transfer her belongings to his saddlebags and then offered to help her up onto his horse. Sarah had never ridden before, but with Jake's patient guidance, she managed to settle behind the saddle. The horse stood perfectly still during the process, as if sensing her nervousness. As they began the ride toward the ranch, Jake kept up a gentle stream of conversation that required little response from Sarah, but helped distract her from her worries. He pointed out various landmarks and told her about the local wildlife, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in their environment. "That's where the old Henderson place used to be," he said, pointing toward a foundation barely visible among the mesquite trees. "Family farmed there for 3 generations before the drought of '98 finally drove them to sell to me. I still find pieces of their old windmill scattered around after bad storms." Sarah found herself relaxing slightly as they rode. The rhythmic movement of the horse and Jake's calm presence began to ease some of the tension she had been carrying for days. For the first time since leaving Dallas, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things might work out after all. The ranch buildings appeared gradually as they crested a small hill. Sarah could see a modest but well-maintained house with a wraparound porch, surrounded by various barns and outbuildings. Horses grazed in fenced pastures, and she could hear the sound of cattle somewhere in the distance. Everything looked peaceful and well cared for, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind in the city. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She was small and round, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her face lit up with a warm smile when she saw them approaching. Martha Morrison rushed down the porch steps with the energy of someone half her age, her weathered hands reaching up to help Sarah down from the horse. Her touch was gentle but firm, and her eyes immediately took in the faded bruise around Sarah's eye with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen trouble before. "Well, bless your heart, honey," Martha said warmly, her voice carrying the same genuine kindness that had marked Jake's earlier greeting. "You look like you've been through quite an ordeal. Come on inside where it's cool, and we'll get you sorted out." Jake dismounted and began loosening the saddle, giving Sarah a reassuring nod. "Martha here has a gift for fixing whatever ails a person. he said with obvious affection for his wife. Food, comfort, practical advice, or just a listening ear, she's got it all. Sarah followed Martha up the porch steps, her legs still shaky from the heat and stress of the morning. The inside of the house was blissfully cool and smelled of fresh bread and coffee. The living room was decorated simply but comfortably, with family photos covering the mantel and handmade quilts draped over well-worn furniture that spoke of years of happy use. "Sit yourself down right there," Martha instructed, guiding Sarah to a comfortable armchair near the air-conditioning vent. "I've got fresh lemonade in the refrigerator and some sandwiches I made for Jake's lunch. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." Sarah sank into the chair gratefully, feeling her body relax for the first time in weeks. "I don't want to eat your husband's lunch," she protested weakly. Martha waved away her concerns with a dismissive hand gesture. "Nonsense. I always make more than he can eat anyway. The man works so hard he burns through calories like a furnace, but his stomach's not as big as his appetite." She bustled into the kitchen, calling over her shoulder. "Besides, Jake can always make himself a peanut butter sandwich if he gets hungry later." Within minutes, Martha returned with a tray containing a tall glass of lemonade beaded with condensation, 2 thick sandwiches cut diagonally, and a bowl of fresh fruit salad. She set it on the coffee table in front of Sarah and settled into the chair across from her. "Now then," Martha said gently, "you don't have to tell us anything you don't want to, but it's clear you're running from something or someone. Jake and I have been married 32 years, and we've raised 3 children who brought home every stray and lost soul they ever encountered. We've learned how to spot someone who needs help." Sarah took a long drink of the lemonade, surprised by how much better it made her feel. The food smelled incredible, but her stomach was still knotted with anxiety. "I don't know where to start," she admitted quietly. "Start wherever feels comfortable," Martha encouraged. "Or don't start at all if you'd rather not. Either way, you're welcome here for as long as you need to figure things out." The kindness in Martha's voice almost broke through Sarah's carefully maintained composure. She had been running on adrenaline and fear for so long that genuine human compassion felt almost overwhelming. She took a small bite of sandwich, surprised to find herself actually hungry once she started eating. Jake appeared in the doorway, having washed up and changed his shirt. "I called Jimmy Patterson at the garage in town," he reported. "He's got a tow truck, but he can't get out to your vehicle until tomorrow morning. Parts for something that old might take a few days to track down, assuming it's even worth fixing." Sarah's heart sank. A few days would stretch her remaining money dangerously thin, assuming she could even afford whatever repairs were needed. The truck had cost her $150, leaving her with only $50 to her name. Martha must have sensed her distress because she reached over and patted Sarah's hand reassuringly. "Don't you worry about that right now," she said firmly. "We've got plenty of room, and there's always work to be done around a ranch for someone willing to help out." "I can't impose on you like that," Sarah said quickly. "You don't even know me. I could be anyone." Jake settled into his own chair and regarded her thoughtfully. "Well, you could be anyone," he agreed. "But you're not. You're someone who's scared and alone and needs help. That's good enough for us." Something in his calm certainty made Sarah feel like crying again, but this time the tears were born of gratitude rather than despair. She had never experienced such unconditional kindness from strangers, and it was almost too much to process. Over the next hour, as Sarah slowly ate and began to rehydrate, the Morrisons shared stories about their ranch and their family. Their 3 children were all grown and scattered across the country, but they visited regularly and called often. The ranch had been in Jake's family for 4 generations, though it had grown and changed considerably over the years. "We used to run cattle exclusively," Jake explained, "but the market's gotten too unpredictable. Now we do a little bit of everything. Some beef cattle, some horses we train and sell, a little farming, and Martha here has started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods at the farmer's market in town." Martha beamed at the mention of her business. "Started it 5 years ago when I got tired of all my empty nest energy having nowhere to go. Now I've got more orders than I can fill. People drive from 3 towns over just for my peach preserves and sourdough bread." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself sharing small details about her life. Nothing too personal or painful, just basic information about growing up in Dallas and losing her parents young. She was careful not to mention Marcus or the circumstances of her escape, but she could tell from the knowing looks that passed between Jake and Martha that they had pieced together enough of the story to understand her situation. When evening approached, Martha insisted on showing Sarah to the guest room. It was small but spotlessly clean, with a quilt-covered bed, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the horse pasture. Fresh towels were stacked on the dresser, along with a bar of lavender soap and a small bottle of shampoo. "The bathroom's right across the hall," Martha explained. "Take as long as you need to get cleaned up. I'll have dinner ready in about an hour, but don't feel like you have to join us if you'd rather rest. This has been a big day for you." Left alone in the quiet room, Sarah sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Not the panicked tears of earlier, but deep, cleansing sobs that seemed to wash away weeks of accumulated fear and stress. For the first time since leaving Dallas, she felt truly safe. The shower was a revelation. She stood under the hot water for 20 minutes, washing away days of travel grime and the lingering psychological residue of her old life. When she emerged, she felt more like herself than she had in months. Dinner was a comfortable affair around the Morrisons' kitchen table. Martha had prepared pot roast with vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, focusing on neutral topics like the weather, local news, and funny stories about the ranch animals. After dinner, they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Jake pointed out constellations as they began to appear, and Martha shared stories about the various characters who lived in the nearby town. "There's old Charlie Peters who runs the feed store," Martha said with obvious affection. "He's been there 40 years and knows every animal in 3 counties by name. And Mrs. Henderson, who runs the library, she can find you a book for any problem you've ever had or think you might have." As the evening grew cooler and the crickets began their nightly chorus, Sarah felt a peace settling over her that she hadn't experienced in years. The Morrisons asked for nothing from her except her presence at their table, and they offered everything they had without expecting anything in return. That night, Sarah slept in a real bed for the first time in days, between clean sheets that smelled of sunshine and lavender fabric softener. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, her body finally able to fully relax, knowing she was safe and cared for. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the window, feeling more rested than she had in months. From somewhere in the house came the sounds of Martha moving around the kitchen and the smell of coffee brewing and bacon frying. Sarah dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Martha was preparing what looked like enough breakfast to feed a small army. The older woman turned and smiled when she entered, her face already showing the warmth that Sarah was beginning to recognize as simply part of who Martha was. "Good morning, honey," Martha said cheerfully. "Sleep well? I thought you might be hungry after yesterday's adventure. Jake's already been out checking on the cattle, but he'll be back for breakfast soon." Sarah insisted on helping with the meal preparation, grateful for something useful to do with her hands. As they worked side by side, Martha shared more stories about ranch life and the local community, painting a picture of a place where people looked out for each other and everyone had value regardless of their circumstances. When Jake returned, he brought news that wasn't entirely unexpected but still disappointing. Jimmy Patterson had towed Sarah's truck to his garage and confirmed that the cost of repairs would far exceed the vehicle's worth. The engine had multiple serious problems that would cost at least $800 to fix, assuming all the necessary parts could even be found. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Jake said gently. "I know that's not what you were hoping to hear." Sarah nodded, trying to process this information calmly. She had known the truck was barely holding together, but losing it still felt like losing her last connection to independence. "I understand," she said quietly. "I guess I'll need to figure out what to do next." Martha and Jake exchanged one of their meaningful looks, and Martha cleared her throat. "Well, as it happens, we might have a solution that could work for everyone. Jake and I have been talking, and we could really use some help around here. Our usual hired hand, Bobby, broke his leg last month and won't be back to full work for another few weeks." Jake nodded agreement. "The work's not terribly difficult, but there's a lot of it. Feeding animals, helping with basic maintenance, assisting Martha with her preserves business when orders get backed up. We can't pay a lot, but we can offer room and board plus a small salary. It might give you time to figure out your next steps without the pressure of being completely on your own." Sarah stared at them both, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You would trust me with that kind of responsibility? You barely know me." "Sometimes you have to trust your instincts about people," Jake replied with the same gentle certainty he had shown since their first meeting. "Martha and I have good instincts, and they're telling us you're exactly the kind of person we'd want helping us." Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into ranch work with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including herself. She had never imagined she could find satisfaction in physical labor, but there was something deeply rewarding about caring for animals and maintaining the infrastructure that kept the ranch running smoothly. Jake proved to be an infinitely patient teacher, showing her how to properly feed the horses, check water levels in the cattle troughs, and perform dozens of small but essential tasks. His soft-spoken guidance never made her feel stupid for not knowing something, and he always took time to explain not just what to do, but why it mattered. "See how this mare's ears are positioned?" he would say as they worked together in the stable. "That tells you she's relaxed and trusting. Animals are honest in ways people sometimes aren't. They'll always tell you exactly how they're feeling if you know how to listen." Martha proved equally valuable as a mentor, teaching Sarah not just practical skills, but also important lessons about self-worth and resilience. As they worked together in the kitchen, preparing large batches of preserves for market, Martha would share stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength in unexpected places. "I came to this ranch as a 19-year-old bride who didn't know a thing about ranch life," Martha confided one afternoon as they stirred vats of peach preserves. "I was scared out of my mind and convinced I'd never be able to handle it. But Jake believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself, and eventually I found out I was capable of more than I ever imagined." As weeks passed, Sarah began to discover parts of herself that had been buried under years of being told she was worthless and incapable. She found she had a natural way with the horses, an intuitive understanding that impressed even Jake. She also discovered she had excellent organizational skills that proved invaluable in helping Martha expand her preserve business. "You've got a real head for this," Martha said one day as Sarah finished reorganizing the entire inventory system. "I've been trying to figure out a better way to track orders and supplies for years, and you solved it in 2 days." The local community gradually began to accept Sarah as part of the Morrison extended family. At the weekly farmers market, regular customers started asking specifically for her help, appreciating her friendly manner and genuine interest in their needs. Mrs. Henderson from the library began saving books she thought Sarah might enjoy, and Charlie Peters at the feed store always had time for a conversation when she came in for supplies. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah herself. The constant state of fear and hypervigilance that had defined her life for so long gradually faded away. She began sleeping through the night without jerking awake at every sound. She started expressing opinions and making jokes, rediscovering parts of her personality that had been suppressed for years. One evening, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Sarah sat on the porch with Jake and Martha watching another spectacular sunset. The conversation had turned to plans for expanding the preserve business, and Sarah had been contributing ideas with an enthusiasm that would have been unthinkable during her first days at the ranch. "I've been thinking," Jake said in his characteristic gentle way, "about that conversation we had weeks ago about you figuring out your next steps. Have you given any thought to what you might want those steps to be?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the colors shift across the sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sure in a way it hadn't been since childhood. "I think I'd like to stay, if you'll have me. Not just temporarily, but as a real part of this place. I want to help Martha build her business into something bigger, and I want to learn everything I can about ranch management. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm somewhere I belong." Martha reached over and squeezed her hand. "Honey, this place has been waiting for you. We just didn't know it until you got here." Jake nodded agreement. "We've got plenty of room for growth, both in the business and in the family. If this feels like home to you, then it is home." 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in the same spot where her truck had broken down, but everything about her circumstances had changed. She was now the official business manager for Morrison Ranch Preserves, which had tripled in size under her organizational skills and marketing ideas. She had also become Jake's apprentice in ranch management, learning everything from animal husbandry to financial planning. More importantly, she had rediscovered who she was beneath years of abuse and self-doubt. The scared, broken young woman who had stumbled onto the ranch that sweltering day had been replaced by someone confident, capable, and genuinely happy for the first time in years. The transformation hadn't been easy or instant. There had been nights when old fears crept back in, moments when she doubted her own worth, and times when the work felt overwhelming. But Jake's steady presence and unwavering belief in her abilities had provided an anchor during difficult moments, while Martha's practical wisdom and unconditional acceptance had helped rebuild her sense of self-worth. "You know," Jake said one afternoon as they worked together repairing fence line, "I've been thinking about that day we first met. I almost didn't ride out to check on that section of road, but something told me I should. Funny how life works out sometimes." Sarah smiled, thinking about the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. Her truck breaking down had seemed like the final disaster in a series of catastrophes, but it had actually been the beginning of everything good in her current life. "I used to think I was just unlucky," she reflected. "Bad things kept happening and I couldn't figure out why. But I think maybe I was just in the wrong place, trying to be someone I wasn't meant to be. It took losing everything to find out who I really am." That evening, Sarah called the domestic violence shelter in Dallas, where she had briefly considered going before deciding to run instead. She had been making these calls once a month, volunteering to talk to women who were where she had been just months earlier. Her story of finding safety and rebuilding her life had become a source of hope for others facing similar struggles. "The hardest part," she told the current caller, "is believing you deserve something better. I had convinced myself that being treated badly was just normal, that I couldn't expect anything different. But there are people out there who will see your value even when you can't see it yourself. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to let them help you." As Sarah hung up the phone and walked back out to the porch where Martha was reading and Jake was planning the next day's work, she reflected on how dramatically her definition of strength had changed. She had once thought strength meant enduring abuse without complaining or asking for help. Now she understood that real strength sometimes meant accepting kindness from strangers, admitting when you needed help, and having the courage to believe you deserved better. The cowboy's soft voice that had first offered assistance on that desperate day had indeed changed her course, but not just by providing immediate help. Jake Morrison had shown her through consistent example that men could be gentle without being weak, that kindness was a choice rather than a weakness, and that some people genuinely cared about others without expecting anything in return. Under the vast Texas sky that had once seemed so threatening, Sarah had found not just safety, but purpose. She had discovered that sometimes the end of one road was simply the beginning of a better path, and that the most important journey wasn't always to a new place, but to a new understanding of yourself and what you were capable of becoming.